So this is a special episode of The Journey today. We have a special guest, Aaron Tokarz. And Aaron and I have been friends for a while and known you in a handful of different settings. And so Aaron, welcome to The Journey. As I've mentioned to you before, I think I first talked to you about The Journey, even a year ago, about the idea of what we'd be doing with this particular show. It is a story about recreating yourself. It's a story about transformation, that when we have setbacks in life, how do we learn from them? How do we fail forward when there's those setbacks? And how do we transform through the experiences of just our ordinary journey? So welcome to The Journey. And before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are as a person, and what do you do with in your spare time and your free time? What do you do for fun?
My wife Phelan and I, we've been married for 11 years. And I start with that because, you asked what do I do in my spare time. We went out to dinner last night for the first time in a while, without the kids, without any distractions, without the dog with us. And when we got to dinner, we were both like, wow, this is the first spare time that we've had in a really long time. And it's funny because our spare time right now is full of doing things to continue on our journey.
Okay.
Which is interesting because we actually came into that realization last night. What do people do in their spare time? Because we don't have spare time. We are very much just on the go, kind of nonstop sort of people. And I think that's how I've been pretty much my whole life. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs. Went to high school here, and after that really didn't have any real direction of what I wanted to do for a living. Through a series of being led in certain ways, I became a police officer, which I had no idea growing up. That wasn't a goal of mine growing up,
Sure.
But it happened. I did that for 11 years. And then had some medical issues, which is a whole nother episode.
Yeah, tell us. You had started off as a beat cop, right? Just a field officer, and then you went from that, and you were a detective, right?
Yeah, I did 7 years on the road as a street cop, and then our detective bureau had a specialized unit that dealt with drugs and guns, okay. And so I went for 3 years in an undercover capacity as a narcotics officer, and bought a lot of drugs and bought a lot of guns, and a lot of that was based in the collar counties of Chicago.
Okay.
So,
and then during that time period when you were working in that unit is when you had some health issues.
Yeah, I woke up on a Friday morning with a pain in my gut, and we learned later that it was acute necrotic pancreatitis, and that put me in the hospital in a coma for about 6 weeks. Basically everything inside looked like I got hit by a semi-truck. On the outside I was fine, but I was just, my body was shutting down, and after about 6 weeks, miraculously, I started to heal and was down to 5% chance to live. Family got flown in from out of state, and they said their goodbyes. And a lot of friends came in and said their goodbyes. I don't remember any of that.
Sure.
And then I woke up, and it's kind of interesting coming out of a coma, because
tell us about that. What is it? What do you remember about? You're going. At some point you were conscious, right? Mm-hmm. And you were in pain.
Yeah.
And then now you're.
Yeah. The last thing I remember is walking into the first hospital, getting into the lobby, explaining to them what was going on, getting into the ER, and then that's the last thing that I consciously remember. And then the next thing I consciously remember is staring up at a hospital ceiling. It felt like I was escaping out of the binder of a big book, like that big dictionary that was on your grandparents' thing that you didn't touch. It felt like I was like trying to climb out of that, but at the same time it was odd because I was trached. I had been my muscle atrophy, so I couldn't move. Right. Basically, all I could do is open my eyes and stare at a ceiling and think, "What is going on?" And then having that memory of, "Oh yeah, I remember going to the hospital. I must still be in a hospital." And then I say consciously remember because subconsciously, dream state for me was huge in the coma, and a lot of that was a mixture of dreams with reality. I have vivid memories of being in a hospital room with family members sitting on my right side reading me a story about a seal. Right?
Sure.
In or a porpoise, should I say, in the desert.
Okay.
You see where I'm going here a little bit?
Yeah.
But at the same time, when that all tied in because my hospital room was underwater, and I had porpoises swimming by outside of my hospital room. So there's
interesting
other ones of being outside a museum in Chicago, sitting on the lakefront looking out over Lake Michigan, but I was actually still in my hospital bed and my cousin was there, and so it was a lot of mixture of I think things that were happening and that I was hearing, but I didn't have the visual for it, so other parts of my brain kind of filled that in.
Sure.
So that's why I say there's that subconscious and conscious, which again, that's way different thing going on there, but
well, and I think it's interesting that when we have a family member, have a significant other who is in a state of a coma or it doesn't appear to be in a conscious state, and when they have visitors and those visitors are doing some of the things such as reading stories or having conversations, they may not pick up on the patient may not pick up on everything, but we never know what they will pick up on.
Absolutely.
And so that is an interesting. Well, as like I said, I've known a lot of your stories, and that's the first time I've heard that story. So that's
there's a lot of stories up there in my brain. That's
sure.
For sure. Yeah.
Sure. So you begin slowly healing from that, but one of the things that came from that was that you became insulin dependent diabetic.
Yes.
And that changed everything.
It did. I spent like the next 6 months in recovery, learning how to talk again, walk again, everything else. And then I went back to the police department in a light duty capacity. And after about a year, it was a mutual decision between doctors, the department, and myself, kind of all of us, that they basically released me on a medical disability to see how I would recover, and I am now in type 1 insulin dependent diabetic, and I'm missing a few organs, and I feel good. I can perform daily activities, but at that point, a decision was made for the safety of myself, the other officers, and the public that we would cease being a police officer. So I took a medical retirement back in 2007, and then about 2 years later, we launched a photography business here in Rockford, and we have been doing that for the last however many years that is.
Sure.
What year is it?
Yeah, so you guys do a variety of type of photography. As partners, as couples, I've seen you at many weddings, and so that's one piece of it, of the type of photography. And I know that's depending on the year, that could be a bulk of what you end up doing. And what other type of photography do you guys do? I know that tends to be all time consuming during the seasons.
During the wedding season, it is. We are a partnership. We we shoot all of our weddings together as a husband and wife team. But then I do some corporate work, some family stuff. Most of our corporate work is still people-based, because taking a picture of a road or of a building is great, but for me, there's really no story there, and the story is in the person. So I very much prefer to shoot people, and even portraits, environmental portraits, where we're putting the subject into their environment and shooting them there to help tell that story.
Sure. And I've seen some of your work, and it's done a pretty amazing job. I know you've done some great things for some individuals with their family members, and so you've done some great things with that.
Yeah, it's for us. It's not a tagline, but it's about capturing moments. And what I've realized is how important those moments are in life. And it's actually, I look at it as an honor for me to be able to get to photograph somebody in those moments, because I'm preserving that for future, that moment that's in time for future family members or whomever it may be.
Yeah. And you also then came into the industry at a time different than, if it would have been 30 years ago, when photography was more restrictive.
Yeah.
And now with digital, there's probably a lot more options, and you can be, much more mobile and be able to do things that way.
Yeah. One of the things that I guess in our spare time, I can pick up a camera and shoot our kids any day of the week. That brings me joy. Just no matter what they're doing, if they're in the backyard, if they're running around, if they're hiking, if they're kayaking, if they're whatever they happen to be activity, or they're just sitting reading. I love to just grab the camera at sporadic moments and try really hard to catch our kids when they don't realize the camera is there, because when you grow up with parents as photographers, you're around that camera all the time, and there's definitely time the kids are, oh, Dad's got the camera again. But it's neat to be able to kind of sneak in and get them for really who they are. Sure. Instead of just the posed or the, a lot of our stuff, most of our stuff is very unposed, and, family sessions with kids that are crying are, hey, that's where your kid's at in life. Right. One of my favorite photographs of the last year is we were hiking in North Carolina up the Big Butt Trail, and granted, our kids had so much fun with that, but about halfway up the trail, Brig he's our 9-year-old, and his eyes started to swell up. He reacted to something in the air. I don't know what it was, an allergic reaction, and he kind of had obviously a 9-year-old with his eyes burning, and you're in the mountains, and you've got some eye drops, but there's not a lot that you can do at that point. He just kind of had this kind of meltdown moment, and there's this picture of him crying, and it was just there's something about that picture. It moved me. And then there's a follow-up one that my wife actually took. I handed her the camera, and it's Brig and I just hugging, and that kind of, I don't know what to do from a medical standpoint, from a dad. It was like, all right, just wrap your kid up, and to be able to capture moments like that has been It's been awesome.
Yeah. Well, I think, as a therapist, we talk about the goal to be mindful and to be present. And I think, when someone's first learning to use photography equipment, they don't want to be, they miss on being in the moment because they're so focused on what they're trying to do with the camera, right? Well, you're very comfortable with the camera, and so in some ways, for you to take those photos, it actually cements that, and even more so, is an opportunity for you to be mindful, to be present. And then there's that, like you said before, that memory now that is lifelong or beyond.
Yeah. Being mindful and present was something that I think I struggled with for a while. I'm learning more about myself and also trying to be more honest with myself. During that time, being a photographer, and we worked from home. My wife and I both worked from home because we're both in the business. So we had the opportunity to be around our kids all the time and to be around each other all the time. But about 2 years ago, I'm not going to take the credit for this one. My wife kind of had I'd say it was a life-changing moment for us, and that she came to the realization that even though we were physically there all the time, we weren't being as present as we needed to be with each other or with the kids. And that was some decisions got made and some bigger things changed.
Sure. Why don't we go ahead and get into that? But let's lay a little bit of this landscape first. So you've been in Rockford now since mid-2000s.
Yep.
Right? And have lived downtown or in the inner city of Rockford.
Yes.
And you have how many kids?
So together we have 3, but we have a total of 5. Mm-hmm. My wife has 2 older kids. They're now 20 and 18 years old. They're now moved out. They're in college. They are doing their thing. Sure. And then together we have 3. We have a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old, and an 11-year-old.
Okay. And go through they have very cool names, so go through the names as well as the ages.
Sure. So we'll start actually, my wife, her first name is Phelan, mm-hmm. Which is unique in its own sense. And then we have Cashin, and he's our 11-year-old, a little quieter, loves to read, little boy. He's getting to be big. Holy cow. And then we have Brig, and Brig is our 9-year-old ball of energy, non-stop, all day, keeps us going. Amazing little guy. He's a little quieter. Socially, he's doing much better, but he's our challenge child. I'll just say that in a really good way. He pushes us all the time. Sure. And then we have Freya, and she is our little one. She's 7, totally daddy's little girl. She's cute and little, and I don't ever want her to grow up. I keep on telling her to stop growing because you've got a daughter. You know how it is. It's like stop, just slow down. Yeah. So those are our little ones, and they're with us full time once again.
and then the older ones.
Yep.
And they are
Chloe and Caleb, and Chloe is 20, and Caleb just turned 18.
Gotcha. Okay. And so Caleb just graduated from high school. Now
he did.
He's starting college.
Yep.
And Chloe she's in. I know what
she was in Madison. She was up in Madison, and she did cosmetology up there.
Nice. Okay.
She's now working on a farm up in Madison, and she's heading out to Portland, we think.
Okay.
Is her next kind of venture. She's going to be leaving the Midwest in about a month. Okay. Caleb just graduated high school. I have to give not even a little credit, but huge credit to him. He ended up finishing off his senior year as the assistant captain of the varsity high school hockey team, which was huge. He's been playing hockey. We put him in skates when he was like, I think 3, and it was really neat watching him progress over the years. And I had the opportunity to coach for years, and then went into the stands, which was kind of hard to do. Sure. But it was really neat watching him grow as and becoming a young adult, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
And Chloe, she's now out on her own. She's been living on her own up in Madison, and like I said, she's got a vision to head out to Portland, and so I don't know. Well, we'll see where it happens. We'll see what happens. Portland's an awesome city, but so she's going to head out there in the next few months.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, you were speaking of adventure. So 2 years ago, you were beginning to explain that Phelan had this idea that, or concern, or awareness that we're not as emotionally present. Maybe we're physically here, and we have the availability to be there when the kids are leaving for school, be there when the kids come home from school. But this idea about being being emotionally present didn't automatically come just because there was a large quantity of time being together. It didn't necessarily mean that quality or that being present with them. And so there was a couple ideas thrown around, and one of them was relocating, and you guys were thinking about relocating.
We were.
And but that somehow morphed into a different idea. So tell us about that, how it morphed into a different idea, and explain what that means.
We had traveled down to North Carolina. How we picked Asheville, North Carolina, I really still don't know. My wife had been there once climbing. I had never been there, and she said, let's go to Asheville. I think we need to relocate to there. We'll slow down our pace. We'll do a smaller house, maybe in the mountains somewhere, and that's going to get us to reconnect. That's going to get us to be closer as a family. So we went down to North Carolina, looked at some properties, bid on some houses, all within I think less than a month period. We just went for it, which again, that's kind of how we roll. Luckily for us, we didn't get the bids. We didn't win the bids on those houses. So we came home, sat down, reevaluated. We went and had coffee together, which we've learned that date night for us is early morning coffees, that was a whole game changer too. Mm-hmm. But we were sitting having coffee, and we kind of went back over the last 14 years of being together and the last 11 years of being married. And we said, when is it that we've done the best together as a couple? And it's been traveling. We love to travel. We love to go see new places. And as we started talking about that more, I'm going to revert back to Phelan, but she was like, wait a second, maybe we're doing this all wrong, because the grass is always greener on the other side, but just because we move into another house in another city in another state doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to cause us or get us to be more present. It's the same, you bring the same baggage. Yeah. When it doesn't matter where the house is, it's still, and for us, it was, again, how do we break out of that? Yeah.
Real quick, I want to interrupt you, because just so that everybody understands a little bit more about Phelan, right? so not only is Phelan a photographer, and she has a cool name, but she also has a hobby or an interest that's maybe a little bit beyond that.
I would say it's more of a passion.
Yeah.
She is a rock climber. And when I say that, I don't really know how to explain it unless you've been out there and have seen her climb. She started climbing her mom introduced it to her when she was 7, but then it really took off in college. She traveled for, I think, a year and a half, living in the back of a pickup truck, traveling all over the country climbing. From once when I met her, that was one of her big, I shouldn't say it was one of her big things, that was the biggest thing, that no matter what, she is going to continue to be a climber. It's in her blood. That's just, it's her passion, where not everybody has a passion, but for the people that have a passion, they'll understand that's it. That is her bread and butter. And climbing with her for the last 10 years, I've been at different crags and I've watched and been a part of that. And I watch her climb, and she just climbs differently. She looks at the rock from a totally different point of view when she's on it. And not only me seeing it, but I've listened to other conversations over my shoulder when people have walked up and they're gonna, they're not in line for a climb, but maybe they've been on that route before, and I've watched people just kind of look up in awe and be like, oh, I've never thought to approach the crux of the climb in that manner. She has it in her, and yeah, so she's a crazy climber. She climbs everything.
Well, and when she and I had an opportunity to talk about what she loves so much about climbing, one of the many things that she loves so much about it is that that's all she's thinking about is climbing when she's climbing. Her mind's free.
Yeah, that's a good thing, because her brain is nonstop, constant ideas, constantly trying to make our lives better, her life better. It's nonstop, and yeah, when we're out there, you can see her just change.
So she knew what it was like to be present as part of her passion, a part of what she loves. And then when her ordinary life, so when she has this idea that, well, wait a second, if we just relocate, it could by default just be a relocation, and we take all our emotional, all our stuff that may not be fixed, may still be there with us. We just happen to, upsize, downside, just change environments, right? And so then you guys, somewhere along the line, then played around and came up with a different idea.
Yeah, we came up with this idea that we were going to buy a school bus and convert it into our house and leave. And go on the road and go do life differently.
Sure.
Go do life on the road, go do life in different places, in different communities, in different environments, and bring our kids with us, and try something different, I guess.
Sure. This would be, at least for most Rockfordians, this would be different.
Yeah.
For most Americans, this would be different.
Yes.
Yeah. So the upside is that Phelan has traveled when she was, I'm assuming pre-kids, had traveled around in the back of a pickup truck climbing. But this is with a family, so it's going to be a little bit different. And so first talk about how do you, buy a school bus, but then turn a school bus into a home on wheels. So how does that work?
It was kind of funny, because when I go back and think about how much time it was, we came up with this idea, and I think it was about less than 2 weeks later, we actually bought our bus. I say that because now, having been part of this bus community, we meet other bus people, and we hear about, we planned it for 2 years. We saved for a year. It took us 9 months to come up with our design. It took us, and again, I've mentioned it a few times already, but we are not the people that can wait 2 years to let, because by the time those 2 years would have come up, we would have probably been onto something else. So we found our school bus on Facebook Marketplace, of all places. We had been looking at auction sites, and we're thinking about buying a bus in West Virginia. I had planned to drive out to West Virginia, look at some buses, and buy one, and hopefully drive it back. And then within that 2 week period before we actually went out to an auction, we found a bus on Facebook Marketplace. It fit the right size for us. There were some things that we needed, and again, we're getting into buses here, so this is going to get really weird, but we needed a flat front puller that was 30 feet, and flat front being it doesn't have the dog nose out the front like most of the school buses now have, that the engine's up in the front, in front of the cab. We needed to have a flat front bus where the engine was right next to us, and that was important because then you get more square footage out of the inside of your bus. All little things that we learned really quick in 2 weeks. And then for us to build the bus behind our house in the city of Rockford, we needed to be 30 feet or under. So our search went from buying a bus to then buying a flat front bus that had the engine up in the front that was only 30 feet long. So that right there narrows your field down to much lower. And I would never have thought to look at Facebook Marketplace for a school bus to buy. I had reached out to my friend Jim, and he's a diesel mechanic, and I said, Jim, I got to find this bus. And he said, I'll start looking. And he actually called me and said, I think I found a bus for you. And again, with us being a little sporadic, I told Phelan, I said, hey, on Monday we're going to drive down to Joliet, Illinois, where there's this bus, and let's go. So the kids were still in school, and we drove down to Joliet, and with cash in my pocket, and she didn't know I had cash in my pocket, and we walked down to this bus, and the guy started it up, and I said, what's wrong with it? And he said, I don't really know, but it's ran great for me for 4 years. He had bought it from a school district down in Tennessee, and that's where our bus is from Tennessee. He said, I've had it for 4 years. He was a cab driver, and he used it for transportation. And he said, I think it runs great. And I said, perfect. Here's the cash. How do I drive a bus? Use your mirrors. Use your mirrors. And I think he said it a third time, use all your mirrors and take your time, and you're a big yellow box and people will get out of your way. And Phelan drove home and I stuck around and figured out how to, it sounds very basic, but I figured out how to use a diesel truck stop. Filling up with diesel is different in a truck stop than a car because the way it works, and all these little things I had to learn, and I learned them very quickly.
Sure.
And I drove home from Joliet, and driving home was, I'd say therapeutic, which sounds, I don't know how that sounds about driving a vehicle, but there's something about being in a big old school bus, just like, just going down the highway, and it's not every day that you get to be like, hey, I own a school bus now.
Sure.
You mentioned, what do you do next? So we went to coffee again, and basically laid out on some graph paper our bus and started drawing.
Okay.
And started laying things out. And in the middle of laying things out became taking the bus apart, because when you buy a school bus, it has seats, it has heaters, it has all the school bus stuff that a school bus comes with.
Sure.
And what it's intended to be. And again, thinking back, it's kind of odd, I guess, in hearing about it. But yeah, so we gutted the bus, ripped out seats, ripped out walls, ripped out insulation, took apart the ceiling, took apart the floor. We got the bus down to a big metal shell.
Sure. Okay. And then now it sleeps the 5 of you.
It does.
You cook
Plus
from there?
3. Yes. Well, we can actually fit 8, but we comfortably sleep 5, live with 5.
And dog.
Which, yeah.
Which you happen to get last.
We happen to get on the road.
On the road, yes. Because, might as well add that.
Might as well add a dog, right? to the narrative. Yeah.
It gives you reasons to stop besides the kids, right?
Yeah.
So it has obviously has a kitchen. It has where you keep your food, and then you built a shower and all these different things that you built. And the majority of it, a large part of it, you did yourself. I mean, you had a lot of people helping you out, and a lot of your friends and a lot of people you asked to be part of that. I know that in itself is a whole story.
Yes.
And then you finally get ready, and I know there was a big push that you wanted to be on the road last July, the beginning of last July. And so July 1st-ish, beginning of July of 18 was the goal.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit about, you guys met your goal within a few days, within a week or so. And then so tell us a little bit about that. And then tell us a little bit about that, because you've already talked about this idea of recreating yourself because of the illness and what happened with you. You're no longer a police officer. Recreate yourself as a photographer. Found out that you love, and that is one of the many things that you enjoy and have a passion for is photography, but more of using film to capture stories and be able to memorialize memories, right? Mm-hmm. And then now this is a similar type of change, but now it's all of you guys are going. And so tell us a little bit about there's a part 1 and a part 2, at least that I know of the story. So tell us about segment 1 or segment 1 of the road.
Yeah. Where to start with that one? It's really, the road became for us in our mind. It was the first 30 days was kind of like chapter 1, mm-hmm. and then the rest of the year was. Well, there's way more chapters in there, but that first month was difficult, challenging from a whole bunch of different standpoints. I'm actually going to back up about a month before we left. Not only were we changing, we were converting a bus, so that also involves, like you had already mentioned, building kitchens and building, how do you do a triple bunk bed? How do you do your kids sleeping like 3 inches from you in the back of a bus? How do you work solar? How do you work heating? How do you work AC? How do you configure where you're going to put all your stuff? How do you go from having stuff that you've had for your whole adult life and then taking all of it and either getting rid of it or putting it in storage or downsizing and getting your whole life into 225 square feet? That was a challenge in and of itself. But then we also said, well, we're going to also pull our kids out of school. We're going to, at the time, we were going to homeschool our kids while we're on the bus. How do we take our business and convert it to be able to use the photography when we're on the bus? How do we generate income? So we've got all these things going on in our heads at the same time that we're building the bus. And for the 2 weeks prior to us leaving, and we had also already rented out our house for the next year, so we were out of our house, we were building the bus while kind of living in it. It was a little chaos in the last 2 weeks. My wife and I were both working last June and into July, 12 to 18 hours, basically from sunup until our neighbors went home from helping us at 11 o'clock at night. We were working on the bus to get it ready. And finally, on a Wednesday night, Phelan said, okay, tomorrow we leave. We weren't ready yet. We didn't have a door on our bathroom. We still don't have a door on our bathroom, but if you know us, that doesn't surprise you. That wouldn't surprise you. We're a very open family. But we got everything kind of wrapped up in that last few hours and got the bus packed, and we took off on the road. And we're driving down the road, and I was in heaven. It was wonderful. This engine was super loud right next to my ear. Everything on the bus was shaking and rattling. The front door flew open because of we forgot to do something, but the front door flew open. But I was still this was it. We were on this journey, we're on this path. We don't have a destination, but we are going for it, and we're up for it. And my wife says, something smells weird. And I said, okay, great. No, the engine smells weird. Something's not right. And I didn't listen. And that's huge in this first month. I didn't listen to my wife. And that became a huge issue for both of us in that first month. But I was hearing her, but I wasn't listening. Mm-hmm. And we broke down on I-90 before we even got to Riverside Boulevard, which, if you know Rockford, it's basically not even outside of Rockford yet.
It's less than 3 miles.
And we were broken down on the side of the road with a bus that was I had no idea what was wrong with it. I started freaking out because everything we had worked on for the last 4 months of building and for the last 6 months of our lives planning, and had rented out your house, had spent a lot of money putting the bus together, all this effort, and we're on the side of the road, and it won't even do anything. It's on the road, dead. When I say if I would have listened to my wife, when we took out the heater months before, we drained out the antifreeze. In the last day of trying to get out of there in a rush, I didn't check all the fluids. We ended up overheating our bus, which ended up, I guess, working out because by the time the tow truck got there, it started right up. But then do we want to continue or don't we with a broken bus? So day 2 was spent at the shop. They ripped apart basically our entire engine, couldn't find anything wrong with it, and said, you got a great bus. The engine's phenomenal. You were a little low on antifreeze, like 2.5 gallons. And I went, oh. And Phelan went, remember when I told you that the bus smelled weird? That was like day 1 and 2. Day 3, we lost a wheel bearing on our trailer. Day 4, we were in Wisconsin, and the nearest place that had the part was like an hour away. So it was driving an hour to get parts to come back to fix the wheel bearing, but we forgot one part, so we had to drive. I mean, it was nonstop. We got through Minnesota and going up those giant mountains in Minnesota. Yeah, thanks for the weird look.
I don't recall that, but a lot of lakes.
We were towing, we had a car behind our bus to tow for when we're in cities. We could barely get up the, quote, mountains in Minnesota. That became, what do we do now with a car that we have that we're towing? We're on our way to Seattle, maybe. How do we get to the mountains?
There may be real mountains coming up.
And so we left a car in Fargo, North Dakota. And then we headed out across North Carolina, and we got to the mountains in Montana, and it was gorgeous. But my wife and I still weren't talking. We were just in a really weird place. And so we've got all these challenges that are occupying our time, but then we're not able to settle and reconnect. Going up the mountains and going 23 miles an hour without towing a vehicle, and you're just in the right lane sweating, and we have air conditioning, but you live in a big glass box, which is kind of like living in a greenhouse. So you can open the windows of a greenhouse, but it's still really hot and humid in there. So we're in this bus that's really loud, a lot smaller than our house, and individually we were both, I think, we were both appreciative of what we were doing, and we were both happy because we were out doing it, but we weren't doing it together, which that was just a big kick in the shins. It was
because that was part of what the goal was.
That was part of the goal, and so quickly we had lost the vision of what the goal was. Know your why and the rest will follow. We forgot what our why was. We forgot what our why was when we pulled out of the driveway. I think we were for me, I was so excited to be doing it and doing something different, and trying something new, the rest of it kind of fell apart. That first month was, at the same time, absolutely amazing. We made it out to Seattle, and we spent time in Seattle and in Portland and on a mountaintop pig farm in Oregon, and hiking in Olympic National Forest and seeing the Pacific Ocean, and kayaking and more hiking and climbing in Bend, Oregon, and spending time whitewater kayaking in Bend, and getting on the rock with the kids. And there's this gorgeous, amazing, I had never been there before, Smith Rock, which is outside of Bend, and it was one of the places that my wife had climbed at years ago, and we went back there and experienced climbing with the kids. But at the same time, I was really struggling. I'm more of the outgoing person usually in our relationship. I am the, hey, it's all good, like thumbs up. I've always got a smile on my face. I can bring that even if there's something negative going on in my life, or if it's in our family. I'm usually the one that can just put a smile on my face and keep us going. And for the first time, I lost it. I couldn't hold it together anymore. And Phelan took that role. She's the quieter one. You had talked about her brain is non-stop, so she's always down a path of the next thing, not even the next thing, but what could go good, what could go wrong, what could go this, what could do that. She thinks a lot, and she really stepped up at that point because she took that role of, okay, put the smile on the face, and what are we going to do today, and what are we going to do kids today and the next day and the next day. And I broke down to the point where I think I took on so much responsibility for everything that would happen with the bus, even though it wasn't something I did, but since I built it, I took it upon myself. When a drawer would fly open, or when we went around a corner and hit a curb when I was driving and the refrigerator flew out. And so it was like I took on like absolutely everything on the bus. It was hot, it was sweaty. And then at one point in Bend, Oregon, I said, that's it, we're going home. I said, we're done. I said, I don't care. We are done. We are going to drive the bus back. I'm going to burn the bus. I had it. And we didn't just immediately drive back, but we started to head back. We did have to be back in the Midwest for some weddings. And when we got back here, coming back through, we picked up the car in Fargo and got back, and my wife actually said, she's like, tomorrow morning we're going to coffee. And I was like, oh, coffee. Shoot, that's where we ground ourselves.
Sure.
And so we went and had coffee and sat there it wasn't coffee, it was like a 4-hour.
What are we going to do?
What are we going to do? And it allowed us to reconnect. That first month was challenging. It was really hard. But if we wouldn't have gone through that first month, I don't think the next 11 months would have turned out the way they did. And it has been absolutely amazing. But the change started I know you got a question, but I think the change for us started back in that coffee house. And it was, okay, sit down. And I think we ordered our coffee, which we normally get, and we sat in the same 2 seats upstairs down here in Rockford, and we have our little corner, and we sat down and we just sat for a while and didn't talk. And then it was like, okay, so that month was horrible. We didn't talk. We are on the verge of divorce. We're going to be bankrupt. The kids are going to, have no clue of even how to add 2 + 2 because we're failing at absolutely everything. We need to make a decision right here in this coffee house. Are we done as maybe not to the extreme of as a couple, but is this is big. Is this project over? Yeah. Is it done? And we went through a list, and I don't make lists, but we made a list, and it was the positives and the negatives, the stay on the road, the go back, no matter what, it wouldn't have been failure because we did it, but it's also that sense of like, we told ourselves it was going to be a year, and we were actually okay with, hey, if this is the decision we're going to make, we can do something else. This isn't, our lives are not, who we are as people are not just simply us in a bus.
Sure.
Who we are as people are not just the family from Rockford that live in a bus and are traveling now. We are way bigger than that as a couple and as a family. But now we're looking at our 1-year anniversary of being on the bus, so that tells you that we made that decision that we need to change. We need to remember again why we're doing this, and it's for that being more present and being more close. And let's take this last month and everything that happened negatively in that month. Now, I just dwelled on it for the last 10 minutes, but it was also beautiful. I mean, the things that we saw were absolutely amazing, and the experiences that we have. And the bigger thing, and I got to go on this one, but one of the bigger things that we took out of that first month is even though we weren't present with each other, we were very open to just allowing the universe to guide us, or God to guide us, depending on what your belief is, and just being open for possibilities, and letting people in that you have no idea who they are, And all of a sudden, during that month, the things that stick out the most to me were the random people that we would meet on the road that would either offer emotional support or physical support or something. And we kind of looked, when we were sitting in the coffee house, that was one of the things that we were like, okay, we know all the negatives that happen in the last month. The negatives are so easy to dwell on. We all do it, right? I mean, do 100 good things, you do one bad thing, everybody, like, that's what the negatives, what everybody remembers. We said, okay, let's put these negatives to the side and let's really concentrate on all the good that's happened in the last month. And where does that take us?
Right.
And so we made that decision sitting in that coffee house. That's it. We are going to pack the bus back up. Not that it was unpacked, but we're gonna get back on this bus. We're gonna leave with more direction. We're gonna leave with more, not necessarily direction of the destination, because it's never about for us the destination, but what are we doing and why? Getting back to the why are we doing it?
Sure.
And that's been something that we have made sure in the last year that we keep reconnecting on, and that's been, I think that's pretty much been not what's kept us going, but what's kept us going.
Sure. Well, I remember talking with you during that time period when you guys were back, and in that, from chapter 1 to what are we going to do, and obviously there were some things you need to do different with the bus itself.
Yep.
Make some modifications to make it more tolerable, right?
Yep.
Things that were more difficult, so you had to work with that. But then one of the things that stood out to me was that this idea, because you didn't know what it was like. And unlike some of the other, I think you told me the name is Schoolies, some of the other individuals who live on the road in either a school bus or other type of vehicle, it appears that they are always traveling, that they're always going from spot to spot to spot. And maybe that's because we're only seeing them through, Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And I know that was one of the things that you told me, is that I don't know for sure where we're going to go next, but wherever we go, we're going to stay put for a little bit to get to know that area. And that seemed to be a big shift as well. And so talk a little bit about, you had talked, some seeds had been planted with you regarding the idea of being present and being open to what God is putting right in front of you, right? And we know that when we get stuck in our head, get stuck with our thoughts, that we may not see the most beautiful sunset in the world, or this most beautiful, lake with the mountains, if we're stuck in our head, right? And right. I'm great at pouting loudly, right? If I get stuck in my head, I can't see anything except my own negative thoughts or critical thoughts or whatever it is. And then the idea of being open to other things, other people, what's right in front of you. Talk a little bit about what that experience, because when we talked a week ago when you got back, that was one of the biggest things that I noticed that was different about you, was this idea of a different found spirituality.
Yeah, it took us a little time to get to that place.
If it is authentic, it will.
Yeah, even having seen it out in Portland or in Montana, the few times that we saw it in that first month, I don't think I realized how much it was actually happening. I saw little glimpses of it, but I don't think I definitely at that point in our journey, I was not, I was definitely stuck in my head. So in that first month, one of the other things that we had done wrong for us, and again, everybody's different in how they do this traveling lifestyle, we were almost too much on the go. So we actually went then to North Carolina, which is where we had thought that we were going to buy a house. And again, at the time, I just attributed it to, well, we met somebody who knew somebody who had this, and then we ended up on a 3-acre lot 15 feet from a river in the middle of a mountain range in Barnardsville, North Carolina, north of Asheville. And for me, that at the time, I think that was just very much, well, again, we happened to be here last year, and we happened to do this, and we happened to do that. But we ended up in North Carolina with the intention of being there for a month to check out that area. That was one of the spots that, again, we had been there the year before, had put in a bid on a house. We wanted to experience what that community was like. But so it was good for us to be there because we were able to kind of settle down. But then we got, it's talking about it and reliving it is really interesting because it makes you think a lot about it. At that point, we had gone down to North Carolina and we were living there. We were able to venture out from that area, met some amazing people, established some definite lifelong friendships when we were there. And we were able to be actually more present with our kids for a while. And then once again, I think life just kind of crept in again. And we realized that being stationary, although traveling nonstop and go wasn't where we wanted to be in that super rushed capacity or the super rushed traveling lifestyle. We also knew that at this point we didn't want to be just sitting in somebody's lot. So we got back on the road and headed south because it was time to move on. It was by this time it was January-ish. We had spent, like I said, 3 months in North Carolina. It had snowed. It was 17 degrees. Living on a bus. Everything worked. It was awesome. The heating was phenomenal. Playing in the snow and living life there was great. But we also felt the need to get back on the road, but then again be more deliberate about what we were doing. That led into going to Florida, which crazy. We were like, we're just going to zip through Florida and get back out and go to somewhere else. And this is really where I think I started to get I really opened up more to just being open for to be led in a direction. And I think I'm just gonna. I think I just need to kind of tell that story that I told you the other day about how we ended up. I don't know, man. It's crazy. Like I love talking about it because it just seems it's crazy. So we had gone down we went down the Atlantic coast in Florida and ended up in the Florida Keys, and even getting into the Florida Keys was interesting. That's a long drive, and
yeah. By the way, you don't zip through Florida, but
no, yeah, you don't. Florida's a really long state, but we got down to the Florida Keys, and that in itself was a challenge of where are we going to stay. You get down to the Florida Keys, and even in Key West, they had a hurricane in the last year, so they're rebuilding. So you can't be with certain vehicles down there, and the RV parks are full, and they're like $100 and something a night. And we most of the time we travel, we boondock or mooch dock, so we stay somewhere for free, that's a whole nother challenge. But we met a couple that was in North Carolina when we were there, and their dad has 2 houses in Key West, and he's got a big driveway, and like things just with having a little bit of a plan, things started to really just started happening. And then it became where we were just letting go, I think, of our own plan and not in a completely throw it out the window sort of way, hippie mentality of like, we don't care what happens, not like that, but being open to when something comes into your life, going with it. And there's a reason that these people are being put in your life. So we had gone through the Florida Keys. We were making our way back up to eventually Macon, Georgia, because we were going to be part of a Tiny House Fest. Tiny House Fest being a 3-day weekend where people are showing off their schoolies or their tiny houses, and people come and check them out because people want to know what it's like to live in 225 square feet. But we were on our way to Macon, Georgia, and we had stopped at a beach in just south of Fort Myers. And when you're on a bus, you use your GPS all the time. Like, I am constantly looking at that thing because it's a lot in gas. It's a lot, you make a wrong turn. Just getting the bus turned around takes a while. So while driving, I'm pretty attached to having the GPS right there. And we left this beach, and I knew that we were going north because Georgia is north of
Fort Myers,
wherever we were.
Yeah.
And for the first time, I think, on the entire trip, I didn't turn on the GPS. I said, I'm just going to pull out of this parking lot. I'm going to take a right because we were facing west. So take the right turn, and I'm going to head north. And it's the evening, and it's about 6 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden, we're in dead stop traffic in Fort Myers Beach, Florida. And what I didn't realize is that the road that we took the right on, it's kind of a one-way off the island, but it's also a one-way on the island. So there's a south and there's a north. And I just happened to pick the right turn. And so we're now in Fort Myers Beach, and we're sitting in dead stop traffic with construction and barricades around. And I just turned the bus off because it was hot. And we were in the sun, and we had been going all day. I just kind of sighed because we sat for 20 minutes and just literally didn't move. And I'm looking at the traffic ahead of us going, this is not good. And GPS is telling us at this point to turn around and go south by like 15 miles because that's the faster route, and we couldn't even turn around if we wanted to. And I'm feeling this negativity creep up. Well, I'm the one that didn't put on the GPS. I'm the one that made the right turn. I'm the one that didn't look at the map. I'm the one that blah, 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 blah. And I'm feeling this negative spirit come upon me. So I weaseled into this. When we were stopped, I looked to my right, and there's this church. And it's the First Baptist Beach Center and Retreat Center of Fort Myers. And I'm thinking about a church, and I said, we need to get off this bus, because I knew that we needed to get off the bus, get the bikes out, just go. And I thought, well, a church is not going to tow you. They'll at least politely ask you to leave. So I pull into the church parking lot at 6 o'clock at night. It's like a Wednesday. There's nobody in the lot. I try knocking on the door. I'm at least going to be polite and say, hey, we're going to be here for a couple hours. We ride our bikes up to the downtown. We come back. We have dinner in the church parking lot. The kids are now starting to settle down. It's dark. And I'm reading to the kids nighttime story before we go to bed, and we get the thump 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 on the door. And when you're on a bus, and when you've been on a bus for like a while, you come to realize that the thump 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 on the door means, okay, kids, pack up. We're getting kicked out of wherever we're at, and it's time to go drive and go find somewhere to live for the night at 9 o'clock at night in a different community where you don't know where anything is. And so that's what goes through my head. It's either the police knocking on your door because somebody from the church called them and are asking them to leave, or somebody from the church saying, hey guys, you got to go. I open the door of the church and
open the door of the bus.
Open the door of the bus, and who I later learned to be Pastor Sean throws open his arms and is like, Aaron, welcome to our church. I'm Pastor Sean. We're so glad you're here. And reaches out and just like gives me the biggest hug I've had in months. And my brain is now just thrown. I'm just like, what? How does this, a million things. How does this guy know my name? Why, what is going on? Why is he so happy that we're here? I'm a big old bus that might be leaking a little oil onto his parking lot. Like, my brain was just, I was confused.
Sure.
Is really what it was. In the meantime, the kids are like starting to pack up their stuff, and I jump off the bus, and this Pastor Sean says, "You have no idea where you're at." And I'm like, "Nah, I'm Fort Myers at a beach," And he's like, "No, you're supposed to be here." I said, "Well, again, now I'm starting to, I'm getting back quickly into that. Okay, get back into the open mindset. Get back into the being open for wherever it is you're being led, and just." I don't know, just go with it, just being open. And he says, my wife and I and our kids were a traveling Baptist singing family that lived on a bus. And my son lives on a bus, and he points around the corner right over there. And my other son, you can't see it, but my other son lives on a bus at the back of our property. And there's 2 more buses on our property. And we have the hookups, and we have the electric, and we have the water, and we have mechanics. And you said, how's your bus running? And it's leaking, and we'll fix it. Like, we're going to get you taken care of. And he said, actually, our son's girlfriend, she's followed you guys on Instagram for like the last 6 months. So when we all came back from the grocery store, there was this big blue bus in our parking lot. And my wife was like, "Sean, find those people and tell them that they're staying." And it was overwhelming in a really good way. We pulled our bus around to the back of their property where we would blend in more with the buses.
Sure.
And that first night we went into their house and fellowshiped with them, and our kids played, and we were up until, the kids were up super late that night, but we instantly became part of their family.
Yeah.
And it was just, where in the past I would have thought, well, it's just by chance, because of all the other things that had added up in the last 9 months or whatever it was, I was now starting to realize, okay, there's a direction. I'm being led. We're being pushed in a certain direction. We're not puppets, but doors are opening.
Sure.
And there's opportunity there. And the way then the next 2 months, the way things progressed over the next 2 months, there's no way that was just by chance.
Sure.
That led into us going to Macon, Georgia. That led us into bringing more schoolie families back from Macon, Georgia, back down to this church where they were having a college retreat where it was 120 kids there. And so I brought bus people back in different buses, other schoolies back down to the church where we all came together as a community and helped out the church in their time of need of serving 120 college kids. That, again, different amazing circumstances, but that led us to us leaving our bus there when we went to Puerto Rico for 2 months and helped the family rebuild a house in Puerto Rico, which all came from, there was no way we would have been able to get to Puerto Rico with leaving our bus unless our bus wasn't in a place where it was safe. And the way things just flowed from that, a little earlier in there, but from that point, it was just being just open to letting God lead us wherever He was going to lead us, and just being open to, there's a bigger picture.
Sure.
I think.
Many times and you and I have talked about this a lot, and I've introduced this concept to you about, the hero's journey and this journey that you've been on, and how there was this order that was going on, but there was concerns in that order. Yes, you had the house. Yes, you had the business and the kids were doing school and all these things, but we weren't emotionally present. and then you cross over and make this commitment to do this and all the things that go along with that. And just like you talked about, some of the struggles and some of the things that you learned via that, and still are continuing to learn, right? And you are beginning to be able to, the essence of all this was probably the spiritual part of it, this idea of recognizing, like you did with the Pastor Sean, when he, in the midst of it, you thought it was one thing.
Yep.
And it ends up being completely something different, and being able to go with that and be in that flow. You talked about something. I had an image in my head of a mountain stream,
Yep.
and you, if you're flowing with that stream, if you're in the midst of that flow, it's not that there won't be obstacles. It's just that when the obstacles come, instead of fighting them, you're finding the teacher within them, and continue to come back to that why. So, Aaron, as we get ready to wrap up for today, and that's a phenomenal story, and I think that's a great piece for us to maybe reconvene. I know you're going to be in Rockford here for a little bit longer,
Yep.
and maybe we can get you back on before you guys take off again. But if there's one thing that you can that you'd be able to share about this part one of us talking about your journey, or you and Phelan and the kids being on the bus, what would be something that you would want to kind of leave with regarding this part of it?
You know, we talked for the last however long it's been about definitely about the journey and the ups and downs of that. I think the biggest thing that I've taken out of the last year, and there's been a lot, some amazing things, but the amount of time that we've spent together as a family and have been able to connect more as a family, that has happened.
Nice.
And that, going back to that why from when this whole thing started, definitely in that second part after that first month, and even in the first month. I mean, the first month was great to connect with the kids, but this last year has brought us together as a family, I think, a lot closer. And I think, I think again, back to that original reason of why we're doing this is to be more present with our kids. That is happening, and we're seeing that happen in our kids individually, even when we're not around them now more. Well, no, not when we're not around them, but when they're off doing their own thing.
Sure.
In the last year, we've noticed, okay, this one is starting to shine, and he's starting to bring up the character trait that he like. I don't know. It's just been really cool to see how much our kids have changed in the last year, and how they're even more present with each other,
Sure.
and how they're connecting with each other. And I think a lot of that is through us connecting with Phelan and I connecting together, and that it rolls downhill.
Yeah.
And to be a part of that and to be able to kind of see it in the middle of all of it has been really cool.
Very cool.
And yes, I will. I'd love to take you up on that offer.
Yeah, definitely. So if people want to follow and see what's going on, besides connecting with us here and listening here for the next of the part two, how is the best way for them to follow you, either on Instagram or Facebook, or what's the best way?
Sure. So pretty much every social media outlet that's out there, we're on those. The main ones are Instagram and Facebook, but we are Simply Us and a Bus.
Nice.
All one big word.
Okay.
Simply Us and a Bus.
All right. Well, Aaron, thank you very much for being on here. I know you have a couple things that you have going on today, so I really appreciate you sharing not only your story, but some of the difficulties part of it, but then also some of the things that you've learned along the way. So
Thank you, Kevin. It's been great.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Aaron Tokarz and Phelan, as they have been bringing their family, doing something a little bit counterculture. And if you want to learn more about them and follow them, as Aaron mentioned, simply Us and a Bus, and you can follow them on Instagram, Facebook, or other type of social media. Thank you again for being with us today, and we will see you next week.